Thank you, everyone, for coming out this morning to my session. My name is James Junkin, and like she said, I'm the president of Mariner Gulf Consulting and Services, which is kind of a boutique occupational safety and health consulting firm. And I see some fellow Veriforce PEC instructors in the audience. I've been a master trainer for that organization for over a decade. So good to see some old friends in the audience. I conducted some of your train-the-trainers with Veriforce and PEC, and for those of you that I don't know, I look forward to maybe hanging out a little bit after this session and spending some time together. But it's great to see everyone. Man, I am tired of COVID-19 lockdowns. I don't know about y'all. I used to do a lot of these things. But I'm a little bit rusty because I've been speaking to a little white light on the front of my computer in Zoom and virtual trainings now for almost 2 years. So y'all be patient with me. You know, it's good to be back in person. I don't know, how many of your spouses send you things in the morning like get up and good morning, love you, that kind of stuff? Well, my wife, God bless her, she knows me well. She knew I was going to come out here and be speaking for the first time in a couple of years, but she didn't send me that normal, you'll do great message. I got, don't pace, don't curse, and make sure your pants are zipped. Right? And about 5 minutes ago, I checked, and yeah, I was glad I got that text. So, you know, it's good to be back. You know, it's good to hear you laugh. 2020 and 2021 have been really hard, particularly on safety professionals. And I think all of us can say that I think America could use a good laugh. But today's session really isn't a laughing matter. It's one that's sort of near and dear to my heart because as I was working from home, I had the opportunity to sit back and sort of reflect on my safety career and what I could do as a safety professional to make changes that could improve the safety for our consultants that are in the field, the contractors we work for, and the instructors that I train with Veriforce. What could I do to make that better? So this session is sort of born out of my research during that time period. When I first got into safety, this was one of the first lessons that I was taught, and many of you here are familiar with Heinrich's injury triangle. His work is claimed to be sort of the foundations for, y'all just come on in, the behavior-based safety system, which in some aspects says that as much as 85% of all workplace injuries and accidents are related to the unsafe acts of workers. And Heinrich came to this conclusion. Y'all know what I'm talking about here. Heinrich came to this conclusion by going back, looking at incident and accident investigations, interviewing the supervisors that were involved, and in his determination, based on his research, 85% of all injuries were related to employee bad acts. No incident investigation, no causal factors, just unsafe acts by workers. Now, this premise has been taught as almost an absolute certainty among many safety professionals, that it's the unsafe acts of workers that lead to incidents and accidents. Now, while Heinrich has been largely discredited by current data, the application of this injury triangle and this line of thinking has still what I'd say is a significant foundational or a significant portion of the safety management systems I see across the oil and gas industry. So while many people reject Heinrich's theory academically, a large number are using that still in their safety management systems in which the focus is on the worker as the cause of most of our safety troubles. How many of y'all seen this chart? We interactive here. You can raise your hand. How many of y'all seen this chart? All right. This is the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And if you look at it, you see a nice trend downward in OSHA recordable injuries. If we go back to, say, 1993, you would even see a more dramatic trend downward from like an 8.5 total recordable injury rate to a 2.8. So obviously, we're doing something right. But if you overlay that with the fatality rate, you can see that there's basically little to no improvement on what actually injures and kills workers. So we can conclude here from the data that what is effective in reducing OSHA recordable injuries may not be as effective as preventing fatalities and serious injuries. The basis of Heinrich, that it's 300,000 unsafe acts equals 600 near misses equals 30 minor injuries equals 10 serious injuries equals 1 fatality, really is not reflected in the data. That supposition is sort of laid bare. So I got to thinking over this past summer and back into last year, if what we've been doing for the last 30 years, if the methods that we've been employing have in fact been focused on the wrong end of the management system, that maybe instead of focusing on the worker, perhaps we should be focusing on the system in which the worker operates. So today's session is really about an integrated approach. It's about looking how to use the best from human performance, the best from system safety, the best from behavior-based safety to create initiatives within your company that help reduce the likelihood of serious injuries and accident potential. Now, while I was working from home and I was contemplating all this, I went back and I got to thinking about a lot of the old training material that I was taught when I first got into safety. And I bet everyone in this room has seen this chart. Despite evidence to the contrary, many of our training programs, our policies, our procedures, when we look at incident and accident investigations, our corrective actions, still see the worker as the source of all the problems when it comes to safety. That if somehow we could just get those idiot workers that work for us to do what we tell them to do, we wouldn't have safety problems. We wouldn't have injuries. We wouldn't have accidents, and all of our safety issues would be solved. Just do what we tell you to do. So what have we tried to do over the past 30 years? We've instituted trotter controls. We've tried to get into people's heads. We've tried behavior modification, progressive disciplinary programs, retraining, all that to deal with the worker issue without ever perhaps considering the system in which the worker has to contend. So while I was doing this, I ran across an article by a man by the name of Fred Manuel. Anybody know Fred Manuel? Read his writings over in Professional Safety Journal, some of his books, things that are out there. Fred had a very interesting study, and I tried to recreate it. So what I wanted to do was go back and ask our customers and clients to send me as far back as 10 years their incident and accident investigations, their root cause analysis. Now, some didn't have it that went back that far, but some did. And I asked them for everything from near misses to first aids to serious injuries, even a few fatalities. And what I came across was astonishing. While Heinrich's theory of accident causation has been largely rejected academically, it's alive and well in the oil and gas industry. Fully 96% of the incidents and accidents that I looked back at and reviewed stated that the root causes of the accident was human error, unsafe acts by the worker, and almost exclusively the corrective action was retraining. In only 4% of the time did the investigation team look into the actions of management, the system that the worker had to contend, the operating environment, the effectiveness of training, factors like fatigue, mentoring, resource allocation, procedures, only 4% of the time. 4% of the time. And 96% of the time, that was totally ignored. So I decided to continue my research, a little COVID-19 when you're working from home, light reading for a safety nerd, right? And the first book, if you're into professional development, that I'd like to recommend to you is Fred Manuel's book, who I just mentioned, on Advanced Safety Management, which examines ANSI D10 and ISO 4500, and using systems as a way to prevent serious injuries and fatalities by controlling hazards in the design of the work. Fred is one of the most respected authors on this subject. In fact, his writings, his books, are often used in occupational safety and health degree programs. You'll see him, like I mentioned, in Professional Safety Journal all the time. But his theory, his foundation is that seek to control hazards when you design the work, not just from an engineering standpoint, but from a work planning standpoint. The next book I want to point out that I read was by Dr. Hopkins. And this book examined the Muir mine disaster, in which 11 workers were killed in an underground mine explosion in 1994. Dr. Hopkins was able to demonstrate that the accident was not caused by the unsafe acts of workers, but by the organizational dysfunction of the company. He stated that this accident and other accidents could be prevented by moving responsibility and accountability from the worker to management, where it really belongs. So the next book I read is this one right here by Dr. James Reason. It was entitled Human Error. And I came about this book because Fred Manuel referenced it in his book. And it's really interesting. Dr. Reason is an internationally recognized and respected psychologist who practices in the area of human error, particularly with regards to the aviation industry. And he rejected the premise that said that accidents are entirely caused by the actions of the workers. Reason claimed that is the system in which workers must operate, and they have to contend that is often the major causal factor in accidents. The next book that I read really was one I'd read right after the BP oil spill disaster, which I worked in back in 2010. These three had me go back and look at it, and it's by Dr. Hopkins. And Dr. Hopkins stated in that book that the root causes of that accident was not the actions of the crew. It was rather in the human and organizational failures of management, which basically made that accident, that incident, almost inevitable. Now, the next book I want to commend to you that I researched is by Sidney Decker, and it's called The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error. If you don't read any other book for professional development, you need to read The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error if you're a practicing safety professional, because this book tells you how to move from the blame and retrain game to one that creates safety as a value in practice at the task level. Now, this book right here has influenced just about all the major thinkers in the areas of human error and human performance that are in the world today. Now, the next one I want to talk about is not specific to safety, but it is specific to continuous improvement. Every safety management system out there has a continuous improvement cycle. Many of you are familiar with PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. That has its roots from Dr. Deming, right? And Dr. Deming, who was a quality management expert, said that if we want to improve quality, we have to improve the system in which workers have to operate. He said, quote, rather than expecting workers to achieve good results in an inadequately designed system, improve the system. And the last book I read was by Dr. Trevor Kletz. He is passed now, but he was a professor down at Texas A&M, and he may be perhaps the father of process safety management. And his book went out and he outlined case study after case study in process disasters and chemical plants and their relations to unsafe acts by workers. And he had a saying that I love. He said this, saying all accidents are the result of human error is like saying all falls are due to gravity. It's true, but it's not very helpful, is it? You know, in a well-designed plant, somebody turning a valve wrong should not result in a disaster. So what is developed is sort of a new view, if you will, to human error as it relates to safety in the workplace. The new view seeks to identify processes where we can identify error, the potential for error, in the design phase of the work. Where are hazards best identified and controlled? In the design phase of the work. So what is that? That's nothing more than ANSI Z590.3, prevention through design, right? Understanding that people are going to make mistakes. People are human beings. People will find error if it's built into the system. So what are we talking about? Using prevention through design in designing out error potential activities in the design phase of the work. This moves beyond seeing as accidents as a choice made by workers that can only be controlled through behavior modification and retraining. Every one of the authors that I previously cited is a strong advocate for moving beyond this attitude that workers come to work and choose to get hurt, and that the only way to fix it is through behavior modification and retraining. Developing and labeling accidents as human error is really no more than a judgment we make after an incident has occurred. It's a label. It's an attribution that we put on the actions of others and ourselves after everything is clear and in focus. So, when we focus on the error of workers exclusively, as most investigations that I've reviewed do, the focus becomes on human beings as being the source and the cause of safety trouble, and the workers being the source of intervention. And even if we say, get rid of these folks and run them off, John, we're just going to get new employees. If we build the potential for human error in the design phase of the work, people will find it. So what am I advocating? When we put together a safety management system, we focus on designing work processes and procedures based on designing out the potential for error. So there are three types here. Exclusion design makes it impossible to commit human error. Prevention design makes it almost impossible, makes it difficult, not impossible, almost impossible to commit human error. And fail-safe design does not reduce the likelihood of human error, but it does reduce its consequences. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, remember this. Hazards are best controlled in the design phase of the work, when you're planning the work. So I want to give you some quotes, some from this book. And I want to leave it to you, with you, as something you can take for your own consideration. This is from Fred Manuel. Managers may wish to get into the heads, managers may wish to address human error by getting into the heads of their employees. Training is often the default corrective action, and that is not effective if error potential is designed into the work. When I read that the first time, a light bulb went off in my head, even for a guy from Alabama. Roll Tide. Any Bama fans with me? There you go. Roll Tide, brother. You're going to graduate from this course, all right? Remember, out of the 1,000 incident investigations this past summer I went back and reviewed, 96% of the time, I found that the fault was in the employee, according to the investigation, and retraining was almost exclusively the corrective action. That's 960 out of 1,000 times. Those conducting the investigation said the fault of the investigation or the incident was the employee, and what we had to do is retrain them. Nothing else was examined. And we wonder why the CIF rate remains the same and it doesn't fall. This old methodology of blame and retrain is not working, and so that's why I'm here today advocating for an integrated approach to safety management, and that's why Veriforce has included that integrated approach in its Safeland USA 2021 basic orientation. If the design of the system, if we design work that is error provocative and it has error potential in it, then human beings will find that error. We can't correct the human beings. What do we have to correct, John? the system. Absolutely. Now, this is a profound change in the way safety has been implemented over the last 30 years. For the past 30 years, we've been attempting to change the behavior of workers as the only real remedy for injury and illness prevention. And for years, I had this same view. This is what I was taught, that the only way to prevent people from getting hurt was to improve their attitudes, because attitudes affect behavior. Anybody remember that? We've been talking about that for years, right? And we've been teaching the same things, only for me to continue to watch people get injured and die in the process. For years, I thought injury prevention began by changing people's attitudes and behaviors. I tried to shape people's attitudes through things like slogans, banners, incentive programs, and I'm not saying that coming to work with a good attitude isn't essential for good quality, good production, and safe work practice. Of course it is. But to say to those 5,000 people who die every year across all industries that they died and their incident was due to a poor attitude, really, is insulting and offensive to their memories. A safety management system that only seeks to prevent injuries by modifying the behavior of its workers is simply bound to fail if the error potential is designed into the system. So when your people make errors, when your people make mistakes, what they're really doing is exposing flaws and weaknesses in the system that you built, in the defenses that you have, right? So, one of these 3 safety management systems we're going to look at here today is behavior-based safety. And this is one of the most popular ones, and one that is used primarily, especially in the oil and gas industry. So what is it based on? It says workers learn to increase safe behaviors and reduce at-risk behaviors, right? Workers learn to increase safe behaviors and reduce at-risk behaviors. The strategies are formed around performance goals like 0 injuries, 0 incidents. It objectively observes and measures safety behaviors of frontline workers. What's that? Observation cards, right? The emphasis and accountability is based on workers seeing an offended worker and correcting it through peer pressure and those type things, coaching that you see very commonly in this system. The next one I want to show you, if you're attending this and you feel like I may be attacking behavior-based safety a little bit, I'm really not. I'm really not. If you are a proponent of behavior-based safety, then you know who E. Scott Geller is. And Scott Geller, who's the father of behavior-based safety, agrees with me that hazards are best controlled in the design phase of the work, in the system in which they operate. Look at this quote. Behavior is an outcome. It is not a causal factor. So when you have an incident, instead of saying the employee made a mistake, the employee didn't follow the process, what you should be saying is, what in the system provoked the employee to do what he or she did? That's where you should begin your investigations. So if you subscribe to behavior-based safety and you have that as a system that you utilize, take a look at this next slide, please. This was written by Scott Geller in response to an article written by Fred Manuel that was published in ASSP's Professional Safety Journal. And what was happening in that article, Manuel was eviscerating Heinrich and promoting prevention through design over behavioral modification alone. And so this is Geller's response that appeared in PSJ, and I just want to read it to you. As the one who coined the term behavior-based safety in 1979, some PS readers may be surprised to learn that I completely agree with Mr. Manuel's analysis, conclusions, and recommendations. Follow Dr. Deming's sage advice. Don't blame people for problems caused by the system. If your safety management system is designed upon people acting perfectly at all times, do we have a safety management system? Exactly. So I'd like to go through some other book excerpts from my research this summer because they had a big impact on me and how I view human error and how I view managing safety. Look at this quote. Human error is not the cause of failure. It is the effect or symptom of deeper trouble. Look at the next one. If you want to understand human error, you have to dig into the systems in which people work. This one by Dr. Reason. Rather than being the main instigator of an accident, operators tend to be the inheritors of system defects created by poor design, incorrect installation, faulty maintenance, and bad management decisions. Their part is usually that of adding the final garnish to a lethal brew whose ingredients have been long in the cooking. So this is a major shift in thinking for some. But really, all that I'm really advocating is a true implementation of the hierarchy of controls. One may say that PPE is the last line of defense, and I agree with that. But if we are asking workers to behave perfectly as our only defense, then really we don't really have any defenses, right? So we need to move away from the idea that if we change the behavior that we solve the safety problem to moving into a thought process that says if we institute prevention through design in the design phase of the work, that we're really just implementing the hierarchy of controls. Design out the error provocative. Now, is it really one way or the other? If you go to a bunch of these conferences, you'll find people in all these camps. There's a human performance camp, there's a behavior-based safety camp, there's a systems camp. And I'm saying, why does it have to be that way? Why can't we take the best from all three approaches and decide what works for us and implement our own management system, right? Why can't we begin with understanding that we need to design out the error provocative, that we need to understand that human beings make mistakes, and reduce at-risk behaviors? Why can't we do that? I think we can, I think we should, and I think that works for most companies because what I'm really advocating is an integrated approach. So what does management systems think says? It says that systems are well designed and maintained. This is a summary of this philosophy. Planning can anticipate and compensate for abnormal conditions. Procedures are complete and correct. People behave as they are expected or they are taught. Therefore, humans are a liability and performance variability is a threat to the system because people make mistakes. Human performance says that people are an asset because they learn to overcome design flaws and functional glitches. They adapt their performance to meet the demands of a dynamic work environment. They're able to interpret and apply procedures to changing conditions. They can detect and correct when things go wrong. Therefore, the flexibility of humans is an asset without which the work could not be completed, right? So, in academia, things always go as planned, but not so much in the real world. In the real world, establishing an effective safety management system is often as complex as the organization is that creates it. So in reality, in most organizations, it takes a combination of these three theories in order to establish the presence of safety. So I love this quote by Todd Conklin. Safety is not the absence of accidents or incidents, but rather the presence of barriers and defenses and the capacity of the system to fail safely. The better we understand how people go about their daily work, the better we can institute controls and we can control hazards in the design phase, anticipate error-provoking situations, and reduce at-risk behaviors. So what is this? This is an integrated approach to it. How do we do it? I wish we had more time. We're short on time to allow for some Q&A in these next sections. But here's my advice to you. Step one, apply the human performance approach. That begins with acknowledging that human beings make mistakes and that if error precursors are not designed out of the system and they're not addressed in our policies, our procedures, our work methods, then we're leaving potential for injury and perhaps serious injury potential within our management system. We look at the task demands, conditions, and the timing of the task that could explain unsafe acts. Why did the person do what they did? Are there cognitive characteristics? Were they tired? Are they sick? You know, is this a resource allocation type thing? We got a training deal. And we need to address how these error precursors exist within our management system. The second part is developing a management system. Okay? Often the causes for unsafe actions and resulting incidents can be traced back to your system deficiencies. If you designed a process that contributed to the unsafe acts, we need to redesign the process. We need to look at the procedures to assess whether they encourage safe behaviors or whether they're encouraging unsafe behaviors. Then we look at the processes for how these procedures were developed in the first place. And lastly, we need to then look at the behavioral approach. Okay? This should be considered the last approach to resolving unsafe acts due to the difficulties in changing people's behavior. So not all unsafe acts are necessarily behavioral or intentional choices. So as sort of a last line of defense, after we incorporate our human organizational human performance approaches, our safety management system, that's when you then apply your behavior-based safety approaches that encourage safe acts and safe behaviors. So really, what we're talking about is integrating an approach that uses the best from all these systems. It doesn't rely just on one approach. We're not concreted into one system, into one approach. We're flexible to meet the needs of our organization by drawing on practical solutions in terms of possible corrective actions, right? The third one, it is convenient, logical, and structured tool for looking at resolving the issue of unsafe acts, very similar to a causal analysis formed in incident and accident investigations, and it forces us as an organization to consider both corrective and preventative actions to resolve the presence of unsafe acts and their effects in the workplace. All right. So, the question I want to leave you here with is one that I've been pondering for many years now. Does your organization have the absence of accidents or the presence of safety? I really wish we had more time together, and I'll leave you with this question. So thank you for attending. Does anyone have any questions? We got a short Q&A session after this. Comments?
So your research was based strictly on this document review, just reading the book?
Well, my research was based upon a couple different things. It was some based on my practical experience being a practicing safety professional for over a decade. I work with oil field contractors in the field on a daily basis, where people get really hurt and people get really healed. So it's not purely academic. The primary basis was looking back at the incident and accident investigations and seeing a disturbing trend that said 96% of this, we're blaming the worker all the time. Not training, not the methods that we utilize in the field, not the fact that we haven't implemented any type of hierarchy control. We're not looking at any process hazard analysis. We're sending these workers into the field themselves with a JSA and saying, you identify the hazards, you put the controls in place. And then blaming that worker when things don't work out. And what I'm saying is, we do that, and now we wonder why the serious injury and fatality trend doesn't beat. So proper planning, thinking about the processes, and designing out where people could make mistakes. You know, there's an example of the B-29 bomber after World War II, right? They brought them back, they put them into commercial service. These guys are using these aircraft, and all of a sudden, in the commercial airline industry, they started having a lot of crashes. And what they determined was, on takeoff, the pilots, instead of grabbing the landing gear to retract it, were actually moving the flaps of the aircraft into the wrong position. And then the aircraft was crashing. Well, guess what? Where were they located? Right next to each other. So you can come back and say, well, we need to retrain these pilots and tell them, don't grab the wrong lever. Or what would be smarter to do? How about move it away from each other where there's no potential to confuse it? That's what I'm talking about when I say prevention through design. Yes, ma'am.
Did you, for those 1,000, did you look at the incident investigation method? Did you notice anything different in those 40 that did come to a different?
Yes, I did. That's a great question. The most common methodology was the 5 why methodology. Very simple, very easy to use. We didn't look into the actual training of the individuals that were conducting these investigations, or if they had training in other techniques like taproot, etc. But the ones that seem to be more complex, the ones that look beyond the action of the worker, almost exclusively had formal incident and action investigation training like taproot, etc., because I know the people who did those investigations. That's a great question. Yes, sir.
So just to follow up that question, so is that process, a design and process to make sure that you're doing your investigations more thoroughly?
Absolutely.
So that would be that would kind of fall into this, right?
Absolutely.
So that would be a process design that was done.
It was an inaccuracy in the process design. How do we conduct our investigations? What are we looking for when we do our investigation? You know, and at the contractor level, a lot of times this is a training issue associated with the safety professional usually, who's the one that's conducting those investigations. But in a broader sense, I think all of us could use a little refresher on looking beyond just the actions of the work, because it's so simple. But usually the answer is really much more complex. It's easy to say, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, we're going to give you a progressive disciplinary action form and then send you on your way. It's a lot more complex to look and ask the question, what provoked you to do that? Did we design the error potential in the system itself? And that needs to be a strong component of your incident investigation system. And if you want to really dig into that, in Sidney Decker's book, The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error, there's a whole chapter about that type of conducting a human error, human performance type investigation.
What's your view on disciplinary actions, implementation of disciplinary actions for workers or certain levels of management?
If I had my druthers, the disciplinary actions will work their way up and not down. Most people don't come to work to do a bad job. Most people come to work to do a good job. Now, whenever I present this, someone says, what about this bad apple in our organization? There's not a safety management system out there that you can design that will prevent bad acts, intentional acts, terrorist acts. I mean, if somebody wants to come and open up all the valves, I can't design a system against that. That's criminality and almost resulting on terrorism. But unintentional acts outside of that, when it comes to progressive discipline, I think what we need to think about is, why did the person do that? I mean, punishing somebody who made a mistake doesn't seem right to me if there are flaws built into the system. So if we're going to punish you, why don't we punish your boss? Why don't we punish the safety department? Why don't we go all the way to the office of the CEO if we're going to punish people? Blaming and punishing people as the way we've been doing it for the last 30 years. And it's not working. It's not working. We're still killing 5,000 people a year. So maybe, perhaps what I'm saying is, we ought to look at our employees as partners in this and helping identify exactly what provoked their actions.
And in support of what you're saying, academic research supports that negative reinforcement has a very, very little change on behavior. And whenever you start getting those bad apples, then you have 936 weeks of risk tolerance or risk development from the time you're born until the time you turn 18 before you go into the adult workplace and start adulting. So that's a very small, minute part of that. I've got 7 years of research on it, and I'll talk to you later.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it.
Good question, sir.
Yes, sir.
So what would be your preferred investigation methodology to uncover the process gaps as well as the human error?
I'm kind of a combination theorist. You know, that's another thing. We get in these camps and say, you know, I'm a taproot guy, I'm an ADS guy, I'm a 5Y guy. Sometimes we need to break down walls and just say, what is it that the investigation method that is best suited for this type of incident. The more complex it is, the more complex the investigation. But I think when you do your investigation, one of the first things you have to ask is, what type of system did we design? Let me give you an example. I just came back from audit just last week. I'm not going to tell you the company, but it's a huge multi-billion-dollar international company, right? That's the hiring plan. The contractor in the field, we did a field audit. And these guys were tied off, working at heights with a hurricane strap. Y'all live right down the Gulf Coast, know what I'm talking about, hurricane strap. It's a strap that hooks your house to your foundation. So when the big wind comes, they took that and they nailed it into a wooden beam across the facility, and they put the D-ring in it and tied off to that. That was their anchor point. Now, we can discipline the workers and say, you had improper anchoring, but really what's the problem there? What do you think the problem is without any other factors?
We're getting proper tools.
They got the proper tools, they didn't design the work properly, who went out there and analyzed it to see what the hazards were. You know, we're real quick to look at somebody that's an hourly worker and say, you should have done this. Well, really, we ought to be thinking about what is the system that we're designing. What was the training? What was the process hazard analysis? When we went out there and looked at the work, and then designed the work so workers can work safe. Does that answer your question? Because I get freaky sometimes.
That holistic approach you're talking about is what people need to do and get off of the single solution bandwagon.
I wanted my little presentation today to be breaking down barriers. And really that's what we tried to do. I was consulted involved in Veriforce's development of Safe Land USA 2021 Basic, which some of y'all use as a safety orientation. We wanted to break down barriers and use all three approaches, behavior-based safety, system safety, and human performance, because I think that's exactly what you need to do within your organization. How much of each depends on your organization. But let's get out of these camps and do what it takes to create safe work practices and bend this serious injury fatality trend. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I just want to add to you that I like the question you asked at the end, because I participate in a lot of organizations, and one of which I work with closely had a presentation a couple years back where someone got a little upset because somebody started talking about the effects of chance or just pure luck causing nothing to go wrong in your facilities or operations. And I understand someone saying, well, that doesn't really exist. You can't rely on luck. And the point was, no, we're not relying on luck. We're talking about the people who allow complacency or contentment with having nothing go wrong to prevent them from reflecting upon their operations and making changes, because they see, as they delve into it, they see their problems. They allow the fact that, hey, nothing went wrong, so we're good. Even safety professionals fall.
I agree with that.
And that's what we're saying is, yeah, you can actually have luck on each side, because someone falls and hits the ground, but that person just didn't happen to be there. They're just 2 feet over. And so they didn't get killed. And so that's luck. That's what we're pointing out with that person. And they wanted to have a good argument about it. But I think the question ties into that.
Thank you.
People fall in places to the fact that things went well, so we had a great day.
Is it true, we got 1 minute, is it true when nothing bad happens, that nothing bad is happening? No. So I'll leave that with you. Thank you for coming, y'all, great group, great discussion afterwards. I'll be around.